Ernie Cefalu. I've always had a great fondness for public television, and Block Party is on public radio. And I can remember when Sesame Street first came on. Now, Sesame Street, being a Baltimore girl, is very endearing to me because Kevin Clash, who does the part of Elmo, is a
Yeah.
Baltimore guy, very respected. And
Mhm.
I'm seeing all these pictures behind you of Sesame
Yeah.
Street.
Yeah. This is the first live album that was
Wow.
done for Sesame Street, and it's what's really amazing to me and what's really fulfilling to me. And we had talked about this, that, Joyce, I've created conceptual packaging from, operas like Jesus Christ Superstar and Aida. I did a beautiful Aida package. And all these rock and roll things. And then all of a sudden, I'm doing something, aside from Alice Cooper and Black Sabbath, I'm doing something for a younger generation, someone that I'm trying to appeal to, someone that is much younger than I am, even though at one point I was that age. You try and kind of relate to that and try and reach back into your memory and see what moved you then and try and create something for them. And like I've always said, I've always tried to create something that would involve the fan or the consumer, the viewer, more than just looking. I want to get them physically involved. And that carried over into, album covers for Cheech and Chong and Jefferson Airplane and The Doors. To me, The Doors album cover for Full Circle was probably the pinnacle in my designing packaging out of an album cover square. And creating something that had a zoetrope with a pillar that sat on the record. And, we had tested it to make sure it was the right weight and wouldn't slow down the music. And so there was a whole process there, and then actually laying it all out and designing it all. And for me, this Sesame Street live album is kind of the pinnacle for that. Last week, we talked about the Kids from the Brady Bunch, and that was it was a less expensive package. It was, just a two-dimensional, both sides, but try to do, get viewers involved in trying to figure out what the song titles were by the images and the letters that I used. And like I said, Joe Patagno did a great job doing the cartoon drawings for that piece. But this Sesame Street album is really special. If you see behind me over here, Big Bird is standing next to the Sesame Street sign, and there's some kids around it. Well, when you open it up, let me go over this way. When you open it up, it becomes a stage in the background. It's got four panels that fold out, and it's a stage with the players and Big Bird and all the characters, Grover and Cookie Monster, are in the background, and they're surrounded by this audience on both sides. So the kid gets a chance to, and you got to remember the age group here is a lot younger than we were last week with the Kids from the Brady Bunch. This is a much younger kindergarten, first and second grade, where the Brady Bunch is probably third grade, fourth grade, up from there. So it came a year later, and I was really into. In 1973, I had already done some construction packages for the Jefferson Airplane and Cheech and Chong, and with the big bamboo, and so that was a real inspiration. How can I give that viewer the feeling? And now remember, we're talking to a young kid, of actually being there with the characters in the background, and they're part of the audience. So as you see, and I'll get out of the frame here a little bit more, it's this really cool construction, very simple. And so to me, this was really it was kind of that way. It was, like I said, it was making a mark in for what I really believed in, what I was trying to do with getting people involved, making it more interactive than just looking at something and listening to it. This required a kid to take it and fold it out, and then the imagination goes wild, and so that for me was really kind of a real exciting thing to be able to see. Oh, hold on a second. There we go.
Oh, you're still there.
There I am. I got lights everywhere. I'm still trying to balance out the lights and stuff. It's really crappy here. I got to fix it. But, the most important thing is that you see the images that we're showing. And again, I'll be sending you these images so that you can, people will be able to see them better. So to me, this was really an exciting package that I had created. And I'm going to go to another frame now that we've talked about this. Here is the stage on the top. On the bottom, you see the back of the album cover. And when you fold it out, it's all these pictures from the different cast members and the numbers 1 through 10. So it's like, and then I did this whole thing with calling out color to be in each one of those letters, and then like a color overlay to show how the gradation of the letters went from one end to the other. And so that to me became even another thing about these kids are learning how to write, they're learning how to spell, they're learning their alphabet, they're learning numbers. So this is kind of like, I thought, as an educational piece to what we were doing with the package. It really was a nice way to use those panels on the backside as much as it was on the inside, or on the front and back, on the front cover. So that was that. And then what we see over here is the poster that we did. It was a huge poster. I mean, it was huge. And I took each one of the songs and the lyrics from the song, and we had Terry Lamb was an illustrator that worked with us for a while, and I had him illustrate. He was really cool at doing kids stuff. So we had him do the illustrations for this fold-out poster. And the poster was big. Kids could put it up on their wall, and the lyrics, like I said, and they're illustrated. And, it just seemed to go right along with the theme of everything that we were doing with this package to a younger audience that I've never really had an opportunity to try and touch, And so, like I said, for me, and the reaction that we got back, from the record company, from the, Columbia Records was doing it. Again, this was a cover that we got because of our New York presence and our partner in New York. And I actually went to New York. I went there to art direct the photo shoots, and for the front and back and front and the pictures that were used on the back. So there were several different photographers, and I was there for a couple of days doing that. But I got to be able to be on the set on the Sesame Street. I stood next to the Sesame Street pole with the sign. I mean, it was really kind of cool. Even though I was older, I was familiar with Sesame Street. I was fascinated, by the characters. It's almost like South Park. In those days, Sesame Street was as different to this audience as Sesame Street, as South Park became to an older audience. But still, I mean, it was animation that never really was so simple. Everything that was animated before that was like really complicated, like Disney stuff, and South Park really changed the way that was done. And to me, what we did here sort of changed the way kids' albums were presented to kids. There were several live albums after this one, but none of them were as unique as this one. And, you can go online and read some reviews about it where, your parents had gotten it and talk about how their kids loved it and put the poster up on the wall in their bedroom. And I mean, it was really, really exciting, and I got a chance, like I said, by being there on the set, I was able to meet Frank Oz, which was, the guy who was, I guess, Miss Piggy, and he was a few other characters, and the Cookie Monster, because the Cookie Monster was one of my favorite characters. That and Kermit. Kermit was another one. But yeah, I think he came later, and I got to meet Big Bird, Carol, Spinny, and I got to meet a few other characters, the actual people that didn't have the costumes. And so for me, it was like really, it was really kind of an exciting, different adventure. And like I said, I was able to stay at our New York office, which was Tony Gravois' apartment on the Riverside side of Manhattan. And so it was really kind of neat. We'd go to the studio and, watch all this going on. And, for me, like I said, it was kind of like doing rock and roll stuff and doing photo shoots for groups, but it was different. It was these characters and these people that were, like I said, an audience that I just really, I didn't really have experience with talking with them and trying to reach out to them. So for me, it was a really unique experience. And this poster is beautiful. Terry did a beautiful job illustrating it, and the kids just loved it. And so I feel really like the Brady Bunch in a way. It was similar in the sense that it was a young audience, but this was, like I said, it was like this, the Kilroy was here for me to that audience. And, I think that a lot of people that that are on the block here and visit the block and watch your show and even my segment were kids that when younger grew up with this stuff. So for me, it's exciting to let those people know who are now fans because of Black Sabbath and Alice Cooper and, all these other bands that we did stuff for, to know that, hey, remember when you were a kid and you got that Sesame Street live album and you set it up and it was such a great experience for you. You just did nothing but smile when you got it and opened it up. And like I said, there's a lot of reviews online of parents, and kids that are older now, that was able to experience this. I was really kind of, I was really kind of elated when I started seeing some of that stuff, because this is an album like the Brady Bunch that we did. It was really important at the time we did it. We were 100% involved in it, but it wasn't our main function. It wasn't our main desire, which was to get the big bands, to get the rock bands, to do that older audience, because rock and roll was becoming so important and music was becoming even more important than it had ever been to this generation. So, being older, like I said, our main goal was to get these, older teenagers and up to, through the albums that we were doing for the band. So this was a whole different experience. Let's see. Now are you seeing that background?
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh, okay. There it is. Okay, good. Yeah, that was because I was looking. I started talking. I was looking at it through the thing, but it was always up when I changed it.
It was always up.
Oh,
And you know what it reminded me of, Ernie, and I'm a boomer, baby boomer. I don't know if you remember the cereal boxes. And I
sure.
think Twinkles was one of the characters, was a little, I think it was an elephant. And I can remember the cereal boxes, the way this album is designed, the way it opens up, it reminded me a bit of the way the cereal boxes were, probably late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
That concept is where you could read the story about a character on a
Yeah.
particular cereal. And that is what is coming up for me.
Well,
That
Snap, Crackle, and Pop was those three characters where they became famous, like the raisins, from the heard it through the grapevine, So yeah, and you're right. I mean, cereal boxes really did have that kind of ability. And you know what else did later on? I don't know whether you were a Mad Magazine fan, but Mad Magazine was doing stuff like that, where you could take that back cover and fold it in, and it would make a whole different image than the one that was there, and you were able to do that. So it was, again, taking that interactive. And I remember those cereal boxes. There were cartoon strips too,
Yes,
that you could get on, from box to box, and you could cut them out and, do this whole thing. And then of course they had stuff inside the boxes, and that all kind of went away, like Cracker Jacks. Remember Cracker Jacks?
I always wanted my prize. I love the prizes that used to be in there.
And now the prizes, I don't know whether you've seen a prize lately, but it's just a printed out thing that's really, you don't even want to bother with it.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah. It's like not even a tattoo or anything, but it's two-dimensional, and it really isn't anything. And I think a lot of that had to do with kids swallowing the toys and choking and stuff,
I'm
Because
sure.
I remember when I worked for Nestle, we were doing this chocolate ball that was chocolate, and inside it had a toy, and it was an egg. They called it. We did a bunch of packaging and advertising for it, but then they started getting all these kids choking on the toy inside, and so they ended up selling. They tried all these different things, and They ended up selling it to another company who I think still puts it out, but it's much different now, So, when you're appealing to that age group, that younger group, there's so many things that come into play.
Yes.
You have to be really careful. Unlike rock and roll, I mean, we never had those kind of restrictions in album covers that we did. And then there were some album covers that we did that had flash paper on them and stuff, and they were never going to get made. But you're trying to constantly do something different, do something unique and representative of the group. I remember there was a Grand Funk Railroad album that I had done, and it was when you open it up, the friction of it opened it up and sparked, and there was this piece of flash paper inside that just boom, in front of your eyes. So it was like really Grand Funk Railroad, man. It was really cool, but record company would never, ever do it. Never do it in a million years. But you got to try. You got to try to keep pushing the envelope. And that's, to me, this Sesame Street, it could have been such a different album. It could have been just pictures, and that would have been okay with them. Them meaning Columbia Records and whoever else was involved at that level. And I think that's what they were expecting. But when the people at Sesame Street saw the comps, because my partner Lou and Tony were dealing with them, because like I had said before in other shows that we've done, we had a relationship in New York. That was why it was so important to keep our third partner in New York that would still touch base with these clients that we had, because Tony and I came out here, we didn't know anybody. Luckily, I had done these 2 comps for Alice Cooper and Cheech and Chong. Otherwise, we'd have really been struggling. We were promised all this work. It never happened. And, luckily, we rented an office space for the company we were working for. And on that same floor, Phil Walden had Capricorn Records. And, they kind of knew who we were through the stuff that I had done. And so Lee Dorman, the bass player for Iron Butterfly, wandered over to our studio one day with Dickie Betts. And they were really digging the stuff that we were doing. And when we started our own company, Lee had really been a huge fan and really got us into Captain Beyond, which was on Capricorn Records, which was a very strange group to have on the Allman Brothers label. But, and Captain Beyond was one of the first heavy metal, along with Iron Butterfly and some of the other bands. They were among the first heavy metal bands around. Indigata DeVito was probably, it was the first time a long song like that had ever played, because up till then it was, you were just like, 3 minutes or something like that.
You were lucky, if you could get past 2 minutes. And then when MacArthur Park came out, that was people thought that was a long song, but it was starting to. We were able to play, especially in the underground FM. They were letting us play, more.
Yeah, and then it always, caught on the other, even though they may have edited or whatever. But they started, they changed. I mean, Lee was an incredible person. We became very good friends, and he had a car lot on Sunset right near one of the billboards for the record companies that we're always posting. I see these pictures of $1 Billion Babies and some of the other albums that were featured on billboards on Sunset, and they were always right there with Lee's car lot. He had these exotic cars that he was selling, he invested in and stuff, and he was just him and Rhino and Rod, the guys that were and Bobby Caldwell, for Captain Beyond. That a lot of them were with Iron Butterfly. Rhino and Lee were. I think Rod came from one of
he was Deep Purple. That
Purple,
he was the first Mark I of Deep Purple. Yeah,
and just really great guys. I'll tell you honestly, they were and full supporters, and they had control. We talked about that. By the 80s, the control had gotten taken away from the groups, but this was in the early 70s, and Lee had a lot of pull. And Lee was, and I think I had mentioned to you this before, it's kind of off subject here, but in a way it relates, because when the people at Sesame Street saw this package, they weren't expecting this. They were expecting, maybe a gatefold album with some pictures on the front, pictures on the back, and maybe something on the inside. But they weren't expecting anything like this. And it was more money than they were allotted to spend. But they were so impressed with it. And I got this. I had come back to LA and to work in the LA office. And my partner, Tony, and Lou still stayed there. And as we finished the mechanicals and stuff, we sent them off to New York, and Tony presented them. But when Tony presented the comp that I had done, because they did a comp on how this would work, they were blown away. I mean, they weren't ready for this at all, and so, but they loved it so much, and they felt so compelled to, get kids. I mean, they were right in sync. What my thinking was on trying to get the fan involved in more than just listening to the record and seeing some pictures. This was something that was really cool. You could fold it down and put it away, and the next time the kid wanted to play with Sesame Street and listen to the music, you open it up and you have the poster up on the wall. I mean, it was really a complete experience for these kids that, that luckily the older kids that were, in charge of Sesame Street and stuff really picked up on immediately and were very insistent, because there was a point where the record company was saying, well, that's really more, and Sesame Street's really a TV thing. And, they didn't really understand what, they were trying to do here. And so, it was great to have the support of these adults that were calling the shots, on this side of the record company, because the record company, we talked about this before, perfect album for a record company is, a picture, and at the top third, the name and the title, the group name and the title of the music. Because when those days, as well as I do, a lot of the younger people here on the block maybe didn't know about record bins and record stores, and how they stacked them and stuff, and and that was part of the criteria. Because when I did the Big Bamboo album for Cheech and Chong, one of the comps was always a pack of cigarette papers, but it was a tall rectangle, not a square. And there were a lot of cigarette papers that had that configuration. Bamboo, I think, was one of the only ones that had the square. Most of them were rectangular cigarette papers. And so one of the initial comps, and I thought was a great idea, was this rectangular album cover, that gave you the ability to do all kinds of stuff that we ended up doing in the Big Bamboo, but it didn't fit the bins. It didn't fit the record bins. And I thought that was great because it would stand up higher than everybody else's album. But they didn't dig it. They didn't, because the shipping containers, that the records went in were all square. They would they'd have to have a whole different box that held 12 albums or 24 albums, whatever they put in the box. And so it just became undoable. Although Cheech and Chong really liked it, Lou Adler was kind of the voice of reason and said, there's just no way that, that this is going to work in the record industry that we have today, and that was back in 71, 70, 72, 70, 71, 72, right there at the end of 71. But, it was something, again, always trying to push the envelope, always trying to be disruptive, and that carried through in this Sesame Street album. It carried through in a lot of the albums that Pacific Pioneer did. Wanted it to be different. I wanted it to be able to have people talk about it. And, it seemed like that was sometimes the only way you could do it. We did other albums that weren't, as creative, so to speak, but we tried to then do it in the photography. We tried to do it in the lettering. We talked about a John Mayall album that we'll be talking about in one of the shows. And that was just mainly a Joe Garnett illustration and a bunch of lettering that I did with all the swirls and stuff. I mean, it was really cool, but, it was a two-dimensional piece, but it still conveyed the feeling of John's music, and that was a real fun album to do too. So, sometimes it's a challenge, a big challenge. And quite honestly, when I did the Kids from the Brady Bunch album, I was really kind of, and we talked about this last show, I was really apprehensive about it. I mean, this was not an audience that I was familiar with, even though it was an older audience than we're talking about here with Sesame Street. I was not comfortable. I come from doing, Jesus Christ Superstar and the Rolling Stones stuff and Black Sabbath and Alice Cooper. And all of a sudden, here's this, kids album that we're doing, and then a year later doing an album that's even a younger audience. But we got a chance to do, and if I would have had a chance to do something with the Brady Bunch it would have really been much more than what it turned out to be. But I'm still happy with what it was, and I think it was clever, and I think people talked about it, and it caught people's attention, young and old, because it's one of those head twisters that you have to sit there, you can't ignore it. You got to figure out what it said, so that was getting them involved two-dimensionally. This album and a lot of the other albums that we did were that. They would get people involved at a whole different level. And so that was kind of what this was all about.
Well, Sesame Street is actually very cool because a lot of celebrities, when it came to Sesame Street, if memory serves me, a lot of celebrities really wanted to get involved.
Oh, Alice Cooper was one that did. Got involved in a few times with the Muppets and Sesame Street. I mean, and he was the perfect guy to get involved. Alice is he's a real character too. And, really thankful to him, as I am to you, for helping us in our career at Pacific Pioneer. I mean, I had said this many times, the best salespeople that we ever had at Pacific Pioneer were Shep Gordon and Alice Cooper. They would direct so much business to us, and it was really great. I mean, it was a great time, and this album was done in that great time, that great era, from 1969 when my career started up into today, where I'm still doing stuff, and again, I'm just so grateful for our neighbors. I had mentioned to you earlier, I get a lot of response from our neighbors here on the block, and and each one of the shows that we do gets more and more views the more we do it, and that's great. It's again, like we talked about, it's leaving a mark. We've left the mark. You and I together, we've done it individually, but you and I together, you can do things individually, but nothing's greater than when you put the stuff together. You and I think the block party and the neighbors on the block are that kind of thing. It's a collaboration and a coming together of a lot of different people, that participate in it and also just watch it and learn, because that's like my whole purpose is to try and educate. Inspiration is what creativity is about. I like to inspire, whether it's another artist or a group or a fan. I like to inspire because to me, that's what creativity is all about. It's being clever, but it's inspiring. If I can inspire, and I get a lot of this, people that tell me, when I was growing up, man, your work was just amazing. I had never met you, and I'm so honored that I get a chance to tell you that here on the internet. And I got to tell you how and I think we talked about this before. There's a young designer named Tommy Steele, and I loved his work. I didn't know who he was. I never met him, but he came later. He came in the 90s, and well after we had established the album cover thing for ourselves and corporate. And I did we had a show at the Forest Lawn Museum in Glendale. And after we went there on a Saturday, there was about 7 or 8 of us that could work in the show. And we gave a presentation to this audience. It was about 300 people. And they got to ask questions, and each one of us got to present. They did a big projection of what we were talking about behind us. And then there was a meet and greet kind of situation where we were sitting at this table. And this kid comes up to me and he goes, you don't know who I am, but I got to tell you, your work changed my life. Oh, your work, I mean, I get goosebumps when I talk about it now, because at that moment, and I didn't know you don't know me, but you inspired me to become a designer myself. My name is Tommy Steele. And I'm like, wow, this is incredible. This is incredible because I said, you're not, your work is really caught my eye, and I am very impressed with it, and I am very inspired by it. And we spent about 10 minutes just talking, and all these other people are, getting stuff signed and stuff. He didn't have anything to sign. He just wanted to tell me that when he saw the show, he had gone to the show, and when he found out later, because this speech or this thing that we did happened it was a 3-month show. It happened about halfway through the show. And so he had been to the show, and he found out that this was going to happen. And so he showed up. and just wanted to tell me how much I had touched his life. And I got to tell you, there's been several, like that, quite a few actually, but it's so rewarding because it it just confirms the fact that I am doing what I set out to do, inspire and leave a mark. Okay, and that's really what it's all about for me.
I made the prayer sign because there was the higher calling that you honored.
Yeah,
And when you have that, when somebody comes up and acknowledges you in such a personal way, yeah,
yeah,
you honored your calling, Ernie. And with this, you could have, like you said, you could have easily done something that was maybe standard, but
yeah,
you went ahead, just went further, and yeah, education. Kids went to Sesame Street for education and fun, and you carried it over further when it came to the music and in that design. It
yeah.
is
I
it.
just,
It's
I
beautiful.
wish everybody could get this poster and put it up the wall. It's beautiful. I mean, it's huge too. It's a huge poster. And it folded down about a half a dozen times to fit inside the album, but again, we heard a lot from parents that said my child has it up on the wall, and they bring the album out and they set it up and they listen to the music, and it's like them being there. And that's exactly the reaction that I was hoping for.